the Huang Yunchen. I'm going to represent our group in this presentation. Our topic is mainly about an exploratory study of experiences and perceptions of English pronunciation learning of Taiwanese high school students. So let us begin. So first, to our contents. So I'm going to give about a brief introduction of our studies. And then I'm going to talk about the purpose of our study, like why we did this study and why we chose this topic. And some research questions will be explained too. For example, like the questions we were trying to find out answers for. And then literature review is the part that we make some research on. And then to the methodology, like how did we conduct this study. And at last, I'm going to give a conclusion and results discussion to our studies. Let's start with our introduction. So we've chosen high school students as our testers because high school students had already experienced many stages of English learnings. We think maybe their pronunciation learning strategy would be fun and they will have more experiences too. And therefore, we limited our study in English pronunciation learning and to find out their experiences and perceptions of these high school students. So let's start with our purpose of the study and research questions. So the main problem is that we've noticed that there were many students, many studies on high school students, especially on their pronunciation learnings. Thus, we are interested in their learning experiences. Like, what ways of pronunciations did they learn since they were young till date? And through these ways, which one did they prefer to use? Which one was their favorite one? And then, out of the English 4 skills like reading, writing, listening, and speaking, which one is more important for these high school students right now? So for some studies and research we had done, the current status in Taiwan's pronunciation learning is mainly focused on the ability to communicate. So communication is like one of the most important thing and one of the main focus in Taiwanese English learnings. And pronunciation learning in Taiwan is mainly divided into 2 ways, like the KK phonetic symbols, I think many of you are familiar with, and systematic phonics. This is a little bit new, and I'm going to talk about it later explain about it later, more detailed. So let's start with KK. So KK phonetic symbols is sort of like a supporting tool to guide students to pronounce correctly. Because in Chinese, like we have 注音符号 for Taiwanese students and 汉语拼音 for Chinese students. And they're like the same concept because they help you to organize words together, to organize sounds together, and you can help it to pronounce correctly. So they're like, yeah, so decades ago, KK phonetic symbols was a trend, a mainstream in Taiwan's pronunciation teaching. And then systematic phonics pops up. Systematic phonics is like a way of natural pronouncing of English alphabets. According to the Ministry of Education, it has become the main teaching way right now, especially for children's English, because it is more fun and more lively for children to learn. And it's actually easier because you don't have to see KK phonetic symbols to help you read. You can just simply pronounce the words by yourself once you see things. So start with our methodology. We chose Google Form questionnaire as our instrument. And our study consisted of both quantitative and qualitative studies. So for the participant consisted of 4 departments and a total of 128 high school students at a private high school in Taichung City. So they were from the Department of Applied Japanese, the Department of Applied English, the Department of International Trade, and the Department of Data Processing. So there are like a variety of students. So for our instrument, this is Google Form. Yeah. So our main questionnaire was divided into 3 parts. So the first one was about students' experience. Like in the first section, we asked about students' learning experiences since like when did they started learning their English, like kindergarten or maybe like primary stages, secondary stages. And the second and third sections, we asked about how they think about KK phonetic symbols and systematic phonics when they were learning English pronunciation. In the first session, we asked about which way or ways that their teachers use when they were teaching English pronunciation. And at the fifth section, we chose a word genre as maybe an unfamiliar word for some students. And when you encounter this familiar words, what would you do? Like maybe you can use systematic phonics method, because like when you see it, you know how to pronounce it. Or maybe you can use the guidance of some of the KK phonetic symbols on it and help you to read. Or maybe some students would choose to look it up on the internet or dictionaries to help them pronounce. Like there are many, many different and interesting results. So for the results of our experience sections, we found out that most students started learning their English since their kindergarten, and most of them use systematic phonics instead of KK phonetics since they were first contacting English pronunciation learnings. And most students, they had direct learning experiences with foreign teachers since that maybe our country is getting more international and more different from the early stages of English learning. And later on, we found out that the KK phonetic symbols experiences and the systematic phonic experiences, they were quite different because most students, they were like, they learn systematic phonics more instead of KK phonetic symbols. And then for Chuck's as the student number of ways of learning at different stages, we can find out that systematic phonics and KK phonetic symbols, they were like a very huge differences in the numbers. So we can briefly make a result in this, a small conclusion in this, that in our country right now, systematic phonics is the mainstream right now instead of KK phonetic symbols. And then for the pronunciation usage experiences, so Taiwanese high school students, they use systematic phonics more, and they are very much like to using it. I think they master it very clearly because it is easier for them to learn, and especially since young, instead of just seeing KK phonetic symbols to help them read, you can just directly read it out. So it is easier for them to acquire, and also like using technology to combine their pronunciation learning is also a trend right now. They can look it up on the dictionaries when they're self-learning. So this is what we found out in their like self-experiences in English pronunciation learnings. They look it up on the internet, like maybe like Google Translation or maybe like online dictionaries to help them read words that they did not or do not understand. And then we come to the self-perception part. So the self-perception part is mainly about what ways did they like when they were trying to pronounce English words, and then maybe like the KK from KK phonetic symbols and systematic phonics, which way did they favor more and which way did they think is more helpful for them? And then like in pronunciation learnings, did they think that precise pronunciation is important for them? And then do they think English pronunciation is difficult or not for them? So this is a quantitative survey for perception part, and we could find out that most people, they prefer phonics as their main learning strategy when they're self-learning English, or maybe in their test exams or their maybe school life studies. And some people, they chose both because they could master both KK phonetic symbols and phonics together. They can combine both two of them together. And there are like a very small amount of students, they chose KK phonetic symbols. So we can see that this is right now in our country, it is not a trend anymore. And it is not even favored by most students. And then for other like effectiveness of learning English pronunciation, we could find out that the main, how do you say it? The main, most people, they still think that systematic phonics is easier for them to acquire and easier for them to choose when they're using things, and they were not really difficult for them. So most of them, they agree that learning English pronunciation is important, and learning English pronunciation is not difficult for them. So precise pronunciation is quite important for these students, they think, and especially in the part to communicate with other people. And then to our qualitative research. So this is mainly about some short answers and questions, like asking when you see an unfamiliar word, what would you choose to learn? What would you choose to pronounce? Like the KK phonetic symbols or systematic phonics, or would you look it up on the internet or dictionaries? Why? And then like which ways of pronunciation studies would you think is more effective for English learning? Why? And for you in English, out of the English 4 skills, like listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which one is more important for you? And our results shows that for question number 1, so I chose some students' answers to represent the result of this qualitative studies. So we can find out that most students, they still think systematic phonics is more effective for them and easier for them to acquire. So this is a, like I mentioned just now, this is the mainstream right now. So this is the way they learn since they were young. And maybe they would get in touch with KK phonetic symbols, and maybe some teachers will still teach students this way, but most of them, they still think systematic phonics is easier and more effective when they're pronouncing English. And then for question number 2, like student 201 mentioned that I love using systematic phonics because I can directly pronounce a word, not through any supporting material. And student 202 mentioned that systematic phonics help me to remember words easier. So like right now, they prefer using it more because it is easier for them to remember words instead of just using KK phonetic symbols to learning it by heart. Instead of that, if you use systematic phonics, maybe when you know how to pronounce a word, it will just automatically pop up in your mind, like you know how to pronounce it, so you know how to spell it. And for question number 3, out of the English 4 skills, so most students still think that listening is the most important part because they think understanding other people's words is more important. So this is also can be related to the previous study we made. like precise pronunciation is important. Like you have to first understand other people so that you can talk with them and communicate with them. And another student think that listening is more important because, yeah, they have to precisely know what you are talking about to give response. And more interestingly, some students think that communication is the most important part. So I just classify it into the part of like speaking and listening for a communication part. So they think it is more important instead of just writing and reading things. And they think it helps them more when they are trying to talk or communicate with foreigners. So at last for our conclusion sections, and then this is a very interesting things because like for me, my personal experience, I grew up in Myanmar, a Southeast Asian country, and for me, I never thought about like pronunciation learning would be that fun. For me, it's just like natural pronouncing because everyone was speaking English, and I just spoke with them together, and that's how I learned my English speaking skills. And for Taiwanese students, because English is not our first language, so we have to find out ways to help us to learn English pronunciation easier and maybe like more effective. Because right now, the Ministry of Education is trying to make our countries into a bilingual system, like English Chinese bilingual system in 2030. So English pronunciation has become more important than ever in our experiences, past experiences. So right now we found out that systematic phonics dominate our English studies, so we can know that it is processing in our English studies. So that's all for today, and thank you for listening. Thank you.